Hello, everyone. I am Blaine Gilmer. Welcome to UGA Sports Rumors versus Facts. That is Jed May, my co-host, there with me, and we won't have Trent Smallwood with us tonight. He's a little bit under the weather, but Jed, it's fresh off of G-Day. There's a lot going on here in terms of the world of recruiting, in terms of the team coverage. You can find it all at UGA Sports. You and Dash and Roddy and myself, everybody, we've been pretty busy the last couple of days.
Yeah, and the Rivals camp in Atlanta was yesterday, so myself and Trent and Roddy were out there for that, and got a little sunburned somehow because when you're pale, Blaine, you can get sunburned even when the sun's not out. So um, learned that the hard way yesterday. But no, there's a lot going on. Georgia is, of course, in it with all these top prospects. There was a bunch in town for G Day, so you had a reaction from number one prospect in 24, Dylan Raiola, on the spring game. I interviewed the number 125 kid in Elijah Griffin, and there's a guy in Jakeem Stewart who very well could end up the number one guy, or at least a top five guy in 2026 that was in town as well. So talent all over the place in Athens and Atlanta this week.
No doubt, no doubt. And just kind of right off the top, we'll address the Landon Thomas decommitment here in just a minute. But I know that you put some notes and things together about the Rivals camp. You and Trent and Roddy all were down there and saw it. But any just glaring observations right off the top from that camp, or people that you talked to that need to point out?
As far as interviews, I was kind of making it a habit yesterday to ask guys, when you think of Georgia, what's the one thing that came to mind? And just about every kid said some version of winning, championships, something like that. And it makes sense, right? When you've got back-to-back national championships. But some of the national guys, since I'm the one doing all the rankings, they're free to do other stuff, and they were surveying guys about, has Georgia surpassed Alabama? And I don't know what the results of that survey were, but and someone asked Jakeem Stewart that question, and his response was, "This is Georgia's generation." So that just shows you where Georgia's at in terms of the perception along a lot of these guys. As far as on-field stuff, Walt Claire Flynn looked great. He always does at these camps. He told us again that the Georgia interest is picking up. Confirmed a couple of official visits. DeAndre Robinson from Mississippi is taking an official visit this summer. That'll actually be his first visit to Athens. So defensive lineman there. Another defensive lineman, Marcus Downs, taking an official visit to Georgia. And then we looked at some younger guys. Gus Ritchie, a defensive lineman from North Carolina, said Georgia interest is picking up. Peyton Zachary, a receiver, 26 receiver from the state of Georgia, had some good plays yesterday. So, and then I think the guy, you look at Juan Gaston, who is 6'8", and like 330 pounds, and he told us that Stacey Searles has told him he's got first round pick potential. So it was a lot of interest. There was some no shows, which always happens at these camps, but there were a lot of guys that stole the show. I mean, if Trent was here, he would tell you there was a linebacker there, Christopher Jackson from Mississippi, who no one really knew, and then he was the best overall player at the camp. He was excelled on every drill. He actually visited Georgia last weekend with a 7-on-7 team or something. So look for I don't know if Georgia will get involved there or whatever, but that young man looked fantastic. So good day yesterday, and a good chance to see and talk to a lot of the guys Georgia is after.
No, it's always good to kind of see some of those guys compete and get to go against some other really talented guys. So now let's get to kind of the news of today. You see it scrolling across the bottom. Landon Thomas decommits from Georgia today. He flips back to Florida State. Remember, from April of 2021 through October of 2021, he was originally committed to Florida State, decommits, and then in June of 2022, Thomas committed to Georgia. He's been, of course, committed until today when he made his flip back to Florida State. Jed, there's been some whispers about this. He's been taking visits down to Florida State quite frequently for a while now, so I don't think it's a shocking development here. But nevertheless, when you lose the guy that's considered the number one tight end in the class, that's going to sting a little bit. But I think one, you can't rule Todd Hartley out completely when it's all said and done over, maybe flipping him again, who knows, but that would seem unlikely at this point. But what is just your reaction to the Landon Thomas flip to Florida State?
Yeah, it seemed like Florida State has been the one school that could pry Thomas out of Athens. And when you think about it, speaking with some people down there, I hadn't thought of it this way, but yeah, Georgia's the in-state school, but Athens is also about twice as far from Moultrie as Tallahassee, because Tallahassee's about an hour and a half. So Mike Norvell's obviously they've got plenty of momentum down there. They've had good success recruiting the southern part of Georgia, obviously with Cam Davis committed as well. So um not shocking. And you look at the number of tight ends Georgia is starting to get involved with in 24, whether it's Caleb Odom, who they recently offered, Amir Jackson, Colton Heinrich, Blaine, who you talked to earlier today, Jaden Riddell. Um, I mean, obviously Georgia wanted to bring in a second guy anyway, but when you start getting involved with more and more guys, it's not necessarily a shock to see a guy leave. So the Georgia staff is prepared. They, like you mentioned in your note, plan they want to take two guys either way. So
Absolutely.
they're going to turn the heat up on those guys, trying to add two more guys to the class with Brock Bowers, all but certainly leaving after the 2023 season.
And just so everybody knows, we are, live here and we are multitasking as we go throughout. So sometimes I may let Jed filibuster for a minute while I ask a question while I'm exchanging messages with people and stuff like that. But no doubt, I mean, there's a lot of guys there after. You see it scrolling across the bottom there if you're watching on YouTube. I talked to Colton Heinrich. He's out of Fort Lauderdale. And he's a guy that, Georgia offered in late January. He absolutely blew up in late January. And I did not even, I hadn't talked about him a whole lot. I saw the offer, but hadn't really paid him as much attention to it with a tight end already committed in the class, but talked to him today. And he told me that, listen, this is something that Georgia has always been wanting to get to. Okay. They've always been wanting to get two tight ends in this class, and that he, didn't care if I was committed there already or not. Georgia, Alabama, two schools that have official visits set for him. Everybody else is kind of playing catch up a little bit at this point. He has set his official visit for May 19th through 21st. So that's breaking here on UGASports Rumors versus Fact. Colton Heinrich, a 4-star tight end out of Fort Lauderdale, setting his official visit for May 19th through 21st. And then, of course, Jaden Riddell is a guy that they offered back in December. And, both of these players have told me they've been talking to Coach Hartley, if not every day, at least every other day, via text or phone calls. And both of these guys, 4-star tight ends, that Jed, I don't think if these two ended up in Athens, I don't think any Georgia fans would blink an eye at it. They're pretty put together, physical, athletic guys.
Yeah, and they're guys that could end up rising up the rankings by the end of this thing too. I know Landon Thomas, the headline that gets splashed across as number one tight end, flips from Georgia, and he might be the number one tight end at the end of this thing. He's a very good player, but there's a lot of very talented guys that Georgia's involved with. So again, you look at tight end recruiting, there's a lot. Like Heinrich was recently offered. Odom is a recent offer. Amir Jackson is a fairly recent offer. Like there's a lot still to develop as far as these tight ends go. It's going to be something that's going to be monitored, or it's going to go through the summer, I think. So, but yeah, as you said, I guess the headline is Georgia's always wanted to take two. They were looking to add one more, and now the door is open to take two of those guys out of that pool of four, or anybody else who might end up popping up on the radar throughout the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the tight end developments for today. Listen, none of those guys that we talked about there, whether it's Odom, Heinrich, or Riddell, were in attendance for G Day. But Jed, there were plenty of high profile guys, big targets that were in town for G Day. I got to talk a little bit with defensive tackle, defensive lineman out of Mater Dei, Aiden, and his last name is escaping me right now. Who's the big Yeah,
Aiden
Breland, Aiden Breland, at 2024. Sorry, there's a lot going on right now, guys. My phone and everything. We got some messages rolling right here, but Aiden Breland, he's a big target out of Mater Dei. That he was there, one of the more memorable and notable 2020 class of 2024 guys. Of course, KJ Bolden was in town. Jed, who are the other guys that kind of stood out to you in terms of the guys that were there for G-Day?
Yeah, you look at that 2025 list, especially, there was, like I mentioned earlier, Elijah Griffin, number one prospect, Jared Smith, an edge, who's a top, I believe, 10 or 20 guy. And then Usman Chroma from Lee County, top 100 guy who could end up being the top running back in the country in his class by the time everything's said and done. And now and commits too. Peyton Woodyard was in town. Malachi
Yep.
Tolliver was in town doing some recruiting of their own. And then 2026, you look at Jakeem Stewart, Kendra Harrison, who is, I believe, 6'7", I want to say about 240 pounds, out of North Carolina, offered as a tight end. And it's going to shock you to hear this, but he says his idol is Darnell Washington, and he tries to model his game after him. He met Darnell on the sidelines because Darnell was there as part of a group of guys from last year's team who were in town. So, that, like we're talking about tight end recruiting, 24 is wide open, 25 Elias Williams is on the list. You looked at 2026, and Kendra Harrison's already been circled by Todd Hartley as a guy he wants to add. So. All three of those classes had just star power across the board in town in Athens this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what you mentioned there with the 2025 class, Georgia really, it doesn't stop. People think, oh, well, they got to focus on this class coming up, right? It's 2-3 classes out that they're building these relationships. They're making the kind of foundation, Jed. And like you said, this past week with 2026 offensive linemen, Stacey Searles offers Darius Gray. A couple days before G-Day, he offers Lamar Brown. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I know we kind of get a small taste of just trying to keep up with these guys, but can you imagine actually being the one that actually being the ones that have to, be responsible for, hey, does Georgia get this player or not? Not just covering whether they get him. I mean, it's no wonder it's kind of a meat grinder for these coaches.
Yeah, and it's we were I don't remember who I was talking about but like you look at Kirby Smart, and sometimes he looks like he's aged a lot since he's taken this job, and
Oh
this
yeah.
is why. Like there's so much work that goes into this. It's like you ask Coach Dunn and what the recruiting calendar was like, say 25 years ago when he was in Athens, and compared to today, there's just so much work that goes into what texting kids and sending graphics and all this stuff. It never stops, like you said, and it's whether it's 24, 25, 26, the 27 class is they offered Zane Rowe not that long ago with
Yeah.
27 offer, so that's starting to come into focus a little bit. I mean, it never stops for these coaches that recruit at the level that Kirby Smart and Georgia do. So that's the price you pay or whatever if you're Kirby Smart and maintaining this program. But you also got to love it a little bit if you're going to devote that much of your life to it.
Yeah, Andy, nice try with all your stuff, man. I can't be flashing any signals or nothing over here, but we're just gonna keep rolling, keep rolling. The first weekend in June, as Jeff Hightoff says, is going to be humongous. But in terms of some more reactions from G-Day, Jed, I think we should go maybe a little bit more in depth on guys that we talked to, kind of what they said, things along those lines. Dylan Raiola, he was not in attendance. He was actually in Los Angeles training, but even while being in Los Angeles, just a stone's throw away from USC, he had his TV locked on Georgia, watching their spring game, and he sent me a quote reaction to the spring game. I'm going to put that up here and read it off for you guys. I posted this on the board. His reaction was, the offense looked very explosive and efficient. The way the two teams competed was awesome, high speed and high level of competition, but also making sure they take care of each other shows how much they compete, but also love each other. So there you go. That was a quote from the number one quarterback in the country who was out there training in Los Angeles, but watching Georgia's spring game take place. So obviously, guys, are watching all aspects of these spring games, right? Not necessarily just, okay, what routes they run and stuff like that, but apparently Raiola was watching even the interaction among the teammates and how they kind of took care of each other with, when they were tackling, all that kind of stuff, since it's kind of friendly fire. So I thought that was kind of some very introspective thinking there, Jed, and maybe some of his dad's NFL knowledge, trickling down a little bit.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's a spring game. It's not necessarily how position X is playing or what the atmosphere of the crowd is or whatever. It's like you said, there you get a chance to be in a game day environment, but also see some different aspects of things. So it's very telling. We've said it a million times, right? That the Raiolas are going to take their time with this and evaluate every aspect of the program. So Dylan's seen so much of Georgia, he's got to find some stuff to look at every now and then. So looking for things that you might not ordinarily look at it is not a surprise when it comes to that young man as mature as he is going through this process.
Yeah, but yeah, it's been one of the more interesting ones to cover. As we've kind of been out here, really talking about it week in and week out. So we'll see what happens going forward. But from one number one prospect to the other, you mentioned you talked to Elijah Griffin. Kind of hone in on that for a second. What were his thoughts, reactions? Of just being around getting conversation with him after this weekend.
Yeah, that was his first visit this spring. Georgia offered him as an 8th grader a couple years ago, so a guy that's been on the radar for a long time. He watched the game Saturday. Saturday after the game, he hung out with Warren Brinson, who is a Savannah native like Elijah Griffin. And the message from the players is, yeah, it's tough. The coaches are strict, whatever, but that's how you win. So it's kind of something you've just got to accept. And then he stayed Saturday night, Sunday morning, hung out with Trey Scott, broke down some film, the good, the bad. And then hung out with Kirby Smart and talked about, Elijah wants to go into or major in finance or business, something like that. Kirby Smart obviously was a Terry College business guy during his time. And I asked Elijah, I was like, does it make, because we've heard Nolan Smith, another Savannah guy, talk about putting on for the home state and all this stuff. And I asked Elijah, does that separate Georgia, the fact they've got a Georgia guy? And he's like, yeah, Kirby, he went to a small school in Georgia. His wife played basketball there. His kids have grown up in Georgia. So I don't see him leaving Georgia. And the kind of the headline quote was, I would love to play for him. So Georgia they're well positioned early on in this recruitment. South Carolina's in, Florida's in, Florida State's in. Talking to Elijah, I get the vibe that he wants to stay somewhat close-ish to home. Down there in Savannah. Obviously, Georgia would fit that bill. So, yeah, I mean, Georgia is as well positioned as. Oh, and another thing about him, I forgot this part. He told me, yeah, I'm looking forward to camping at schools this summer: Georgia, South Carolina, Michigan, Ohio State. So, and I put this in a post on the board. Number one players don't always want to camp. Playing, I mentioned there were some no shows at the camp yesterday. A lot of guys, yeah, I'm ranked highly and I don't need to camp, want to camp. He wants to get out there and see how he stacks up. And I think that says a lot about who he is as a person and a player, the fact that he wants to, showcase his talent, see where he stacks up, whatever. So a very impressive young man and a very mature guy that Georgia's in really good shape with early on in his recruitment.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I think that, it's interesting that you talk about number one prospect in Raiola, number one prospect in Elijah Griffin. Not only does Griffin want to camp, Dylan Raiola has actually expressed that he wants to camp at Georgia this summer. Possibly to just get that day of, okay, what would it be like to be coached by the Georgia staff for a day? So that's something that he is actually, brought up and broached the idea of. And then a guy who I think could be, if it's not Julian Lewis, who could be the number one prospect in the class of 2026, Jakeem Stewart was also in town. So you're talking about number one, and possibly another number one. You mentioned Elijah Griffin got offered by Georgia in 8th grade. Jakeem Stewart got offered in the 7th grade, started getting recruited in the 7th grade. And guess what? Georgia was both of their first offers. Georgia was the first one to offer Griffin. They were the first one to offer Stewart. And Trey Scott and Kirby Smart are really starting to build a strong foundation there with Jakeem Stewart. You saw him in person at the camp, Jed, and he's been the MVP the last 2 years in a row. Tell everybody what kind of monster Jakeem Stewart is.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Speaking of camps, Jakeem Stewart hangs out at G-Day and then is in Atlanta the next morning for a camp when he could have easily just no-shown like everybody else and headed home. But the dude has a voice that sounds like he's 40 years old. Like he's on the side during one-on-ones cheering on fellow D linemen, like, my voice can't even do it justice. I mean, he looks like a grown man. He sounds like a grown man. He's a freak show. I mean, I don't know any other way to describe it. He could walk into. He's got the size to walk into Georgia or anywhere else and play 3-tech right now. And Blaine, you mentioned this in your story when he first showed up. His first visit to Georgia, he was, I think he said like 320 pounds or 330 pounds.
Yeah, he was 6'5", 330 as going into the 8th grade.
And so then in the year and a half since, he's reshaped his body. He's all muscle. He's 6'6". I think he was about 265, 270 yesterday. So he's got the discipline to really work at his body, keep himself in shape. So he's as impressive as Julian Lewis is on the offensive side of the ball in that 26 class early on. Jakeem Stewart is just as impressive, if not more so, as a defensive guy. I mean, he's going to be that. The question is maybe how much does he grow? Like, does he grow enough to be more of an interior lineman than a 3-tech or a 5-tech? That's a question that is just going to be determined over the next couple of years. But no matter what, dude, he's going to be sought after by anybody and everybody coast to coast.
Yeah, I mean, hanging out that picture, with Michael Williams, obviously a guy who was highly productive his freshman year at Georgia, and I'm sure this is something that Jakeem Stewart is looking at. But I mean, Alabama, Ohio State, LSU, all of these, perennial powers. There's probably about 8-10 schools that he rattled off that are, it's still early for him, but guys like that, man, they're big time guys that you have to recruit 3 and 4 years out now. So Georgia's trying to do their due diligence there. Rhett Womack mentioned Julian Lewis in the comments over here. I wanted to say, I wrote a story about Darius Gray, a 2026 offensive lineman that got the offer from Stacey Searle in his office. And he said one of the first texts he got after posting it was from Julian Lewis. And it said, "Hey man, come home." And Julian obviously saying that because, he's a state of Georgia guy, and Georgia obviously has a really good relationship with Julian Lewis at this point. They've been recruiting him since the 7th grade. So there's just so much going on across multiple classes. We really appreciate everybody tuning in right now. We got Andy Stowe in here, of course, Joe Huff, Rhett Womack, Jay Shipes, Jeff Hightop, Marie is in here, Harry. Appreciate all of you guys being in here. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you're listening on podcasts, on the podcast version, rate and review. Okay, 5 stars. If you think we're 5-star prospects, like Jed likes to throw out some 5 stars on the rankings every once in a while, then go ahead and throw those in on the podcast platforms wherever you're listening: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all that good stuff. But here on YouTube, just hitting that subscribe button and hitting that thumbs up really helps us a lot. And like I said, we appreciate everybody tuning in. So now, Jed, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the vault questions. And these first two, we've kind of, hit on at least the first one a little bit right here. Let me take that off. It's from GDogs00.
Does Landon Thomas sign with UGA? And then what is the timeline for Dylan Raiola to announce a commitment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously things look bleak right now in terms of Landon Thomas with him having flipped back to Florida State and it being the second time now that he's committed to Florida State. So you would be probably hard pressed for, Todd Hartley to flip him back, especially with the conversations that we're hearing that Georgia's having with guys like Jaden Riddell. Of course, they're trying to get in deeper into the sweepstakes there for Caleb Odom. And then, of course, Colton Heinrich announced that he has a official visit coming up, 4-star tight end from Fort Lauderdale, who, by the way, it's not just I posted a note today when I was watching his film. I was like, okay, this guy looks like a mini Jason Witten. And then I'm talking to him on the phone and he goes, I wear number 82 because of Jason Witten. He plays just like how Jason Witten played. So he's a phenomenal looking tight end recruit. But Jed, I mean, they don't burn bridges, but it'd be hard to see Landon Thomas ending up back in this class by signing day.
Yeah, I mean, if it was like if he had flipped to, say, South Carolina, that would be one thing. You try to flip him back, but the fact that it's to a school that he was committed to before, it makes you think it's going to be tough. Just because getting him, he didn't flip from Florida State to Georgia directly the first time, but getting him to back off a Florida State pledge for a second time would be awful tough. So. Never say never. I mean, you won't know till he signs on the dotted line. Obviously, he's not a guy who is afraid to back off a pledge. But yeah, I think he's going to end up in Tallahassee.
Yeah, I think that's where he'll end up. And then the timeline for Raiola, I mean, they're just they're just kind of waiting on him to make his decision. He is kind of went through all of his visits. You see him not scheduling any more visits. He has said, for a long time now that he really loves everything that Georgia and Mike Bobo are doing over there. And I just think that listen, this could wrap up sooner rather than later. He wants to get it over with one way or another, I think, before his senior year gets started, and being able to just enjoy his senior season, and possibly even to be able to, recruit a little bit for a school on an official visit, things like that. So I think that's all I can really, throw out there about that one. I think it could be maybe sooner rather than later, if in fact a decision has been made. All right, Jay, we got one from Darth Janus here.
Yeah, who do you feel Georgia made big moves with this weekend on the recruiting front? Go Dogs from Dallas, Texas.
All right, big moves with on the recruiting front. I more of the stuff I think was just building relationships. Maybe the time that KJ Bolden got to spend with some of the guys like Peyton Woodyard, I think that could have a big impact. Guys already committed there. That would be one that I would say. I'd also say, Aiden Breland that I told you I interviewed, and we'll have something on soon. Coming all the way out from California and, seeing that atmosphere on G-Day. I think that's a big thing for a lot of these guys, Jed, because even though it's not totally full and stuff like that, it's still a pretty great atmosphere for a spring game, for a scrimmage. So it's going to be guys like that, I think, that got the biggest impact. And then, of course, some of those young guys just getting to know the staff a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the 24 list wasn't as I don't think it wasn't as star-studded, but I think a lot more of the star power was focused in those 25 and 26 classes. You mentioned Peyton Woodyard. He has visited Alabama and Ohio State this spring before getting to Georgia, and I spoke with him earlier today, and he was saying that the staff reiterated how much he's wanted at Athens. He said, Kirby Smart told me I'm going to need to compete for playing time as soon as I get here. So Georgia wants him. They're fighting to keep him. Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia's definitely getting an official. He told us he was probably going to take an official to Alabama and Ohio State as well. I think Georgia's still in good shape. He's solid, whatever, but that's going to be one that Georgia's got to keep. And he told me, Georgia is going to keep my commitment by remaining open and honest and all that kind of stuff. So that's one to watch. And then KJ Bolden is getting back on campus is big. He took, he and Edric Houston kind of took visits this spring to places they hadn't seen before. They kind of feel things out in their recruitment. I think getting back to Athens before the summer, especially, is big to, I guess remind yourself why Georgia was in that top group for him in the first place. So those two guys, and then like you said, some of these younger guys like Elijah Griffin building relationships, Jared Smith, Justin Green, 24 guy, was in town. That's a big visit. But I'd probably say KJ Bolden was I'm sure he's probably the guy that got the most attention this weekend for sure.
Yeah, it's it's hard to tell in terms of how much movement, because like you said, our friend Donut Dog on the vault, Jed, he likes to say, does anybody ever have a bad visit? Does anybody ever actually have a bad visit? And there's rare times where you get some kernels of truth from people that it goes one way or another, but interesting stuff there. I don't think that you can really quantify, okay, this is how much it moved and stuff like that, other than the observations we've heard from people. And I think just following, okay, who's taking the time to go on their own dime, because it's unofficial all the way across the country, or, several states over, things like that, to, come to a spring game. And I think that tells the tale right there. All right. Medical Dog says, what happened with Landon Thomas? Hartley is a man who loses. I just think, listen, there's a reason he was committed to Florida State early on. He really likes that school, likes that, coaching staff down there, and they worked him pretty hard to get him back in the fold. And he's been down there a lot. Listen, Colquitt County is a lot closer to Tallahassee actually than it is to Athens down there. So, people forget, Jed. Yeah, it's in Georgia, but it's not, it's not that far from being in Tallahassee.
No, it's not at all. And we've talked. It's in the comments over here. It's bad business to burn bridges. Other coaches besides Kirby Smart know that too, and Mike Norvell and his staff did a good job, and they're doing a good job recruiting. Like I mentioned, South Georgia, and just in general, Florida State is doing a good job recruiting. So they worked him. They kept getting him on campus, and when he showed up, or when he went to Tallahassee this past weekend, that seems like it was the final nail in the coffin. A story from our national guy Adam Friedman said Landon called his high school, or texted his high school coach Sunday morning and said, "Yeah, I'm gonna flip back to Florida State." So, we've said it before. Sometimes you just get beat and you move on, and it is what it is. So, Georgia won't give up, I'm sure, but I think it's more likely that they get two of those other guys from the Riddell, Heinrich, Jackson, Odom realm that we've kind of been talking about all night.
Yeah, and too, it's not like it's a loaded tight end room for Georgia. I mean, they'll still have next year. They'll still have Oscar Delp. They'll still have Lawson Lucky. Still have Pierce Sperlin. There's lots of guys that are still there in that room. So hey, it may be some more opportunity early on at Florida State. Who knows? Jagan17J shot at Micah Hudson. Let's go with that one first. I mean, I know that he's kind of been talking to Brian McClendon some. I think Texas is kind of leader in the clubhouse on that one. But listen, hey, if Dylan Raiola ends up committing at some point, I wouldn't rule any receiver in the country off the board, Jed. But right now, I wouldn't place Georgia as a favorite for Micah Hudson.
Yeah, I think right now he's kind of in that group that Ryan Wingo was in, where Georgia's kind of on the periphery, and then obviously Ryan Wingo got on campus and things went well and officials coming. So I think that would be the next step to get any real traction with Hudson, is get him on campus, whether that's this summer for an unofficial, official, whatever. But yeah, I wouldn't put the likelihood too high as of right now. Although things are, things can change, but I wouldn't say so right now.
Yeah, and it'll be it'll be interesting to see what happens with some of these big time receivers. The second part of that question was, can Georgia flip Bowens? They're talking about Chauncey Bowens, running back committed to Florida. Listen, he's one of a handful of few running backs that Dell McGee is talking intently to. Him, Tatum, Christian Clark. So there's a lot to these guys that they're talking to, and the players, when we talk to them, Jed tell us they're talking to them every day. Del McGee is. So it's a select group of guys. Of course, Jarrett Gibson is supposed to be coming on an official visit first weekend in June. So there's about 4 guys. I think they have a shot, but as we said with Cam Davis all along, who shut down his recruitment this past week, Jed, you can't really predict a flip until they decommit. Now, obviously, there's ones like Landon Thomas that happened today, but even that one, you kind of heard the rumblings coming for a little while. So hard to predict until as long as somebody's still committed to a school.
Yeah, it's like we've said. They're committed till they're not. So can Georgia flip him? Absolutely. I mean, I don't think that's impossible by any stretch of the imagination. But it always seems like it on the surface it's easier to get the guys who aren't committed versus having to pull somebody away from a school. So although Bowens might have watched that Florida spring game, like, man, 17 points. That's a tough road to hoe. So I don't know. I mean, Georgia can flip him. I think getting him back this summer will be key, whether that's unofficial or not, just to continue building on that momentum. There was a lot there after he visited this spring or January, whenever that was. So get him back and continue building on it. Then they'll go from there.
Yeah, and we don't talk as much about team stuff. It says who are likely the starters at wide receiver this fall, but I think I can just go out on a limb and throw 3 names out there. Probably Dominic Lovett, Lad McConkey, Thomas. Some kind of combination of those 3 guys are going to have a really good shot of being on the field a lot. All right, Jar 52. How many 5 stars will commit the weekend when Raiola is visiting? Also, who do you think pulls the trigger? So he's asking how many 5 stars commit. You'd have to think how many are going to be there. One's already committed in Peyton Woodyard. I'm not even sure Jarrett Gibson is a 5-star at this point, but because running backs typically don't get that distinction nowadays. A lot of times, he could be worthy of that, in my opinion. But he'll be there. I don't necessarily see that happening. Ryan Wingo is going to be there at the same time as him. That could happen. So we'll see what goes on there.
Dylan Stewart, I have down that weekend. I don't know if he is a 5-star currently. He could be by that time if there's another rankings update that I have to do before then. Justin Scott will be in town. That's one where, and I've seen somebody ask about Scott in the comments. That's the one where Georgia had all that momentum when they offered, and he postponed his recruitment, and then he was going to take an official for G-Day, and then the official got moved to June. So things have kind of, I don't know, stalled out, I guess, on the Georgia front at the moment. So that's going to be Georgia's big swing to try to pull him out of the Chicago area and come down and play in Athens. So that's a 5-star. Jeremiah Smith, if he comes to town that weekend, obviously that's the one receiver is probably most heavily influenced by what Dylan Raiola might do. Yeah, so you look at the pool, there's Smith, Wingo, Scott, and maybe Stewart if he's up to a 5-star by then. So probably four uncommitted 5-stars who could be in town that weekend.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of talent coming in town at one time. 4 to 5 coming in. You got a couple. One that's already committed. I mean, Jed, I don't know what the over under I would set on it are, but when you got that many in town, hey, you got a shot to be pulling in some major recruits. And listen, the wave of emotions that seems to go through every recruiting cycle. It seems about this time, late March into April, there's some wavering stuff. Guys have been committed, no longer committed, some shuffling in the class, all that kind of stuff. And then you look up, the dust settles at the end of the day, Jed, and there's Kirby Smart and Georgia with another, top 3 recruiting class of, and I would venture to say that's going to be my answer here for Big Fatty 94 says, what y'all's hottest takes for the potential class? I think it's no worse than a top 2 recruiting class. I mean, they're going to be, and it could end up being, with a couple of key additions, it could end up being the most highly rated one that Kirby Smart's had at Georgia. That's my hot take. Jed, what's a hot take of yours on this class?
I think, let's see. Here, I'll go with, I think this is the year that when you stack them side by side, most people will look at it and say the offensive class is better than the defensive class. Not to say the defensive class will be bad by any means, but when you look at what this offensive class has the potential to become, with the offensive linemen still out there, the tight ends still out there, the receivers who are committed, then you've got the running backs. Dylan Raiola's out there. Jeremiah Smith is out there. Wingo. Every week where there's receivers you don't talk about, there's like a guy like Aaron Butler who could end up in this class maybe. And there's so much still out there on offense. I think this is the year that Georgia's offensive class upstages the defensive one a little bit.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think offense. Here's another hot take: Georgia has more than 15 offensive players in this class. If you go back and look at the last 3 classes, I think it was 9, 13, and 11. So going 15 or higher, as many as 17 maybe, that would be a big time offensive haul for Georgia. And I think that's showing that, hey, Kirby Smart, you got to build a roster. And a lot of people like to put Kirby Smart in this box of, hey, he's a defense only guy, that kind of stuff. But I think it shows that he's kind of, obviously listening to what his program needs, what his roster needs, and trying to adapt as time goes forward.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen what he's done from a strategy standpoint of how the offense has evolved during his time here. And you got to put emphasis on it in recruiting. You got to get the top receivers. You got to get these difference-making quarterbacks. So there's a lot of potential out there with this offensive class, just what could be brought in. It's pretty and there there's offensive linemen out there. I mean, that's the thing. The offensive line classes the past couple of years have been solid, like not huge, not off the charts, I should say, but there's between Calhoun, there's Jordan Seaton, there's a lot of meat on the bone, I'll say, out there at offensive line still.
Yeah, no doubt. And appreciate that tomahawk dog. Like the setup back here, working hard to give you guys a good setup. Okay, trying to get it going over here. All right, Night Dog says, any rumblings on portal targets, individuals and or positions? Jed, right now I think Georgia's more worried about getting down to the number that they needed. I believe Dash reported today that they needed to lose 5 guys to get down to the 85 mark. Ryan Davis just entered the portal. Of course, Sean Washington, he's been gone for a while from the team, but just officially entered his name into the transfer portal. And of course, Bear Alexander. So that would be 3 guys closer to getting to that number, but you still got 2-3 guys that have to exit before you can think about bringing anybody in.
Yeah, and I think positions, like you look at receiver, which they've obviously already addressed, so that's off the list. DB, they've added Smoke Bowie. I mean, there's no real position that's glaring. The one that comes to mind is if maybe they would look at a experienced edge rusher type, but even then, Blaine, like you said, they're trying to get under the number more so than bulk up. So I think they're probably done in the portal, barring anything kind of surprising. But You know how Kirby Smart is. He'll keep an eye on it, and then if there's anybody out there, he won't be afraid to jump on it and figure out the the numbers on the back end later. But I think they've kind of hit their needs in the portal that they already wanted to back in the first window.
Absolutely, absolutely. Night Dog has another question here. Let's see if I can get it clicked on. The Are the UGA coaches confident in Jackson Muschamp as a viable option on the depth chart if another quarterback transfers, or do they have to have another guy? I'm not saying that they're not. They don't. I mean, obviously, Jackson Muschamp's on the roster. Things of that nature. He practices quarterback every day. But I think if stuff were to get to dire straits, like I'm talking about like Kentucky 3 years ago when they had Lynn Bowden at quarterback because they had no quarterback, you'd see Lad McConkey or Brock Bowers line up at quarterback before something else because you just need a certain level of athleticism there at quarterback, and I think that's what you'd see before you would see a walk on. Listen, not all walk-ons are created equal. Okay, Stetson Bennett in coming back around, and it's like Haley's Comet. That doesn't that doesn't pass around, but every so often, Jed.
Yeah. And like you said, he's on the roster for a reason. But I think in a perfect world, Kirby Smart would want 3 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. So, and that's something we've mentioned before too. But it's hard to do that because a quarterback doesn't want to transfer in to be a third string guy. So I don't think that's what they want, but that could be the situation that they're stuck in should one of the 3 guys into the transfer portal in this current window. So yeah, that wouldn't be the ideal, but it might just be it is what it is.
Yep, it'd be that would be a scenario that, my goodness, would Dash and Roddy and everybody and yourself have a lot to write about if those kind of things happen for sure. Are there any new silence after this weekend from Andy Stowe there? Andy, I don't think there's anybody that you would consider a new silent. There's been guys that have been kind of in that boat for a little while that we're just we got commitment stories ready. Jed and I were writing several of them this weekend, ready to be, just be ready and have guys ready to cover for you guys on UGA Sports if they should indeed pop off. But I don't think you would categorize anybody as new, Jed.
Nah. Because like we were talking about, this weekend was because think about last year. Last year was the weekend that Justin Rhett took I believe it was an official visit, decommitted from Notre Dame while in Athens for G-Day, and then committed within the next week. So nobody necessarily in that mold in the 24 class this year. Like you said earlier, this weekend seemed like a lot more building relationships with guys down the line. So and guys that far out aren't committing yet because their recruitments have got a year and a half left. So yeah, no news silence, but definitely some guys that we've there's Google Docs galore floating around in some tabs right now. So we've got our eye on it. But yeah, nothing like you said, nothing seems new after this weekend.
Absolutely. All right. Prediction on these two groups, if you had to pick today, wide receiver and defensive line. Okay, so wide receiver, Jed, if you had to say today who Georgia finishes with in the class, and we're talking as of April 17th, not even, whoever it is, Georgia's going to take 2 quarterbacks in this class. So we don't even know, what that looks like on the second one yet. But here is the Boy Racer 45 demanding you to tell us who the final receivers are going to be for Georgia in the class of 2024.
I mean, other than the ones committed, I personally really like where Georgia is with Amari Jefferson. He's a guy, another one of these guys Georgia was on early. Will Muschamp was he Jefferson goes to school with the younger son, so that's been a guy Georgia's been in on. He's very high on Georgia every time I've talked to him, so that's one to watch. And
I'm not sure I understand.
See, I don't understand either.
Siri is all confused right now.
Recruiting is it's wild, Siri. I don't get it either. It's just I think they're gonna get one of these the big, these 5-star type guys. I just don't know who yet, and it's like
Well, Nitro Tuggle is going to be in the class. We know he just committed. I think Sokovie White. I think people are sleeping on him pretty hard. I think the athleticism is off the charts. He's really, really good athlete. Who knows if the NICAR would be the one that don't know if that is impacted that much by Landon Thomas or not. He's alluded to you that he's not going to comment one way or another on it. We have some information that, hey, Florida State's definitely trying to flip him as well. So I would put him as, probable to be in the class, but I'm not saying a lock to be in the class. Whereas Nitro and Sokovie, I would put as locks in the class. And then I would turn and look at guys like Ryan Wingo. I think Ryan Wingo is a guy who I really think that Georgia made big strides with in his visit this spring. And I also think he has really, really strong ties with Dylan Raiola. And everything that we are, hearing based off the visits and the momentum of the Dylan Raiola deal, if he should indeed commit to Georgia, then I think you would see guys like Ryan Wingo. You would see guys like Jeremiah Smith be heavily involved here in this. And defensive line wise, I think Georgia's got a real good shot with Justin Scott that's coming in. But other than that, Jed, I'm talking about guys like Melvin Hills, that was a guy from Louisiana that Trey Scott's talking to every day. He's not the highest ranked guy, but he's a guy that they really like. Of course, we talked about Aiden Breland coming out from California. There's lots of guys in this class of 2024 that are still in play when it comes to the defensive line.
And Marcus Downs as well. He's a guy whose recruitment's blown up. Georgia was his first Power 5 offer in January. And then that means something to guys. And his recruitment's picked up since then. I talked to him yesterday. Georgia's getting an official visit. Georgia wants him as that 3-tech type size, which he's 6'5", 275 pounds is what he measured in at yesterday. So pretty prototypical size for that spot. So he's a guy that I think Georgia's very high on. And like I said, there's a bunch of 5-star guys out there, whether it's
Edric Houston, you can't.
Dylan Stewart. There's a lot of
Williams Dewannery.
It seems like Georgia's going to get one of those guys, but I don't necessarily feel good about picking one in particular that I say, yes, he's going to be in the class. So they're going to get one of those guys. I don't know who yet.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we've been going here strong for over 50-something minutes, more than we typically go. We appreciate everybody tuning in here. Like I said, there's a lot going on. Make sure you're subscribed to UGA Sports so you can get all the information and news and notes as everything goes down. We try to cover everything from all angles and be prepared to tell you guys all the news, whether that's team coverage, and whether it's team coverage, recruiting, of course, the basketball side of things. Dash covers baseball like nobody else. So make sure you are tuned into UGAsports.com. For Jed May, I am Blaine Gilmer. We will catch you guys next time. Got a lot of stuff we're covering, so make sure you tuned in. And everybody have a good evening. We'll catch you next Monday Night Live at 8:30.